Hi everyone, I'm back to do a quick lecture on a Con Law 3 video. I've done Con Law 1, Con Law 2, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the P&I clause, Privilege and Immunities Clause, and the Contract Clause. And this is included in the state powers, limitations on state powers, which is on my second video, and this is the rest of that video. So P&I clause and Contract Clause. And then I'm going to move on to limitations on federal power. So first of all, the Privilege and Immunities Clause. The Privilege and Immunities Clause prevents a state or a city from intentionally discriminating against non-citizens regarding rights fundamental to national unity. Okay, so non-citizens. State or city from intentionally discriminating against non-citizens regarding the rights fundamental to a national unity. A lot of MBEs on these. Privilege and Immunities Clause continued. For example, some of those rights are a right to support oneself, right to be employed, engage in business, practice one's profession, or civil liberties. Corporations and aliens are not protected. This is important because I've seen this on an essay, which was the third question to the essay, so it was a real quick write-up. And this is all you needed to put, that corporations and aliens are not protected by the Privilege and Immunities Clause. It was a corporation they were talking about. Okay, so that's important there. I've seen it before. The test is a rigorous scrutiny. Discrimination is substantially related, first element, to the peculiar evil of the discrimination, and there are no less discriminatory alternative means available. So this is the strict scrutiny test that we use if the P&I is involved. Contracts Clause prevents state government from passing laws that retroactively and substantially impair existing contracts. I've seen a few MBEs on these. Now, there's a private contract or a public contract. Private contract, the state is substantially impairing private contracts. The law must be reasonable and appropriate to serve a significant and legitimate public purpose. That's for a private contract. Public contract, more strictly, the law being necessary to serve an important public purpose. So up here, reasonable test, this one important, which is usually the intermediate. Scrutiny, which we'll talk about later. So private contract, public contracts. Public contracts are a little more strict. Private are a little less strict. It's a reasonable RBT test, which is usually easier to pass. Okay, so that's the contract clause, and I have seen MBEs on that. Now let's move to, that's the end of limitations on state powers. Now we're going to move to the limitations on federal power. Of course, we talked about the 10th Amendment, the police powers, in my other video. Reserves to the states all powers not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution. Okay, so reserves to the states all powers not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution. Federal government cannot commandeer the states. Federal government can impose regulatory statutes of generally applicable laws applying to both private and state sectors. So they can, if it's generally applicable. So those are some arguments on your exam or your essay. Continue with limitations on federal power. Improper delegation of legislative power. I've seen MBEs on these. Legislative authority. Congress cannot delegate its legislative authority to make law. Can't do that. Regulatory authority. Congress can delegate regulatory powers to other branches of the government, and I've seen it, and the answer is always yes on this. They're allowed to do it if there are intelligible principles that govern the exercise of delegated authority. So they can delegate regular powers to other branches, such as the executive or the judicial branch, and it's okay for them to do that. Okay? Let's go to the next slide, the approach, and that's it for federal powers, limitations on federal powers. So we're going to go to my approach. And I put this approach in every con law lecture that I do because this is how I memorize the bigger issues, and then inside, of course, are the smaller issues, which you have to just kind of know. So it's JSPFLLI, and I usually use a mnemonic for this, but you guys can make up your own. J is for justiciability, S for state action, P for powers reserved to the states, which I just finished up here. F is for federal powers, which I just finished up here. And limitations on state power, and limitations on federal powers, which I've done already, and now individual rights. So my last thing here is to do individual rights. I've done all of these so far on other lectures. So if you want to go onto my YouTube channel, you'll see all of them. Okay, and they get to the point. This is how I kind of condensed all of my learning and all my books and all my outlines and all my lectures that I've been listening to kind of just reflect the MB, what they want for the MBEs and the essays, and I use the NCBE actual outline they put out there for MEEs and the MBEs, and this is how I created this. So once again, justiciability, state action, powers reserved to the states, federal powers, limitations on state power, limitations on federal powers, and now my next and final video is going to be individual rights. Okay, so good luck on the bar exam, and I'll see you guys on my next video.